What if I told you that Marvel Comics Fantastic Four, Marvel's first family, one of, if not the most famous family in all of comics, what if I told you that DC Comics had their own version of the Fantastic Four, and it actually might be better?
Word to wise, grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple eyes. You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
I know, that is a pretty inflammatory statement, but I don't make that statement lightly. The Fantastic Four is I would say a pillar of not just Marvel Comics, but of comics in general. It is a series of stories, a collection of characters that I think it's safe to say they're pop culture icons. I think you could actually say that the Fantastic Four are so famous that even people who don't read comics probably know who they are, and at the very least know maybe a handful of things about them. It's almost like Superman or Batman or even Spider-Man levels of fame, that type of fame where I could maybe walk out on the street right now, stop 100 random people and ask them to tell me something about the Fantastic Four, and they would probably at the very least be able to say that, oh yeah, there's a guy who can stretch, there's a rock dude, some woman who can turn invisible, and there's a dude that always says flame on and is on fire. They can all probably tell me at least one, if not all, of those other things about those characters. Well, it was a weird time in the Marvel comic space. There was a period of time where Marvel just didn't own all the rights to the Fantastic Four. Technically, it was all due to licensing, and it wasn't just the Fantastic Four. There were other characters that Marvel didn't own the rights to. Characters like Daredevil or Ghost Rider, even Blade to a lesser extent, Punisher, so on and so forth. There were just certain characters that Marvel just didn't want to promote because there were deals in place that were some predatory and others just really bad deals in general. They basically put Marvel in a position where they were never going to get the rights back to these characters, and Fantastic Four was one of them. And I've talked about this before, but the whole Disney Fox deal, the thing that everyone was freaking out about back in the before times, pre-COVID, everyone was freaking out about how Disney, because they own Marvel, they bought Fox, and that means they got the X-Men back.
Long lost bro, get to squeeze his stinking sister to death or what?
I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm fine. I love it.
They got the Fantastic Four back. They got all those other characters back. And then suddenly, the narrative kind of shifted. People mostly focused on, oh, well, this means we're going to start getting movies and TV shows about this stuff. But the thing that no one was really talking about was that it also meant we were going to be getting comics of this stuff again. And Jonathan Hickman was the one who actually, I guess, kind of broke this news some years ago. Jonathan Hickman went on record saying the reason why the Fantastic Four did not have a comic in the late 2010s is because of the Fox deal. The fact that Fox owned the rights to the Fantastic Four, and any characters or any story arcs, anything really that Marvel put into those Fantastic Four comics, Fox could use all of that stuff to be able to extend the license that they held over it. That was kind of how all this stuff was happening. This is why there were so many Fantastic Four movies and how they had rebooted it and tried to bring it back. Why the X-Men had so many movies. It was because they were just throwing shit at the wall, because the more movies they made, the longer they got to keep the rights. The moment that they didn't have a movie in production by a certain date, it meant that that property reverted back to Marvel. That's kind of how Marvel got Daredevil back before the Disney Fox deal. They were supposed to have a Daredevil movie in production by a certain date, and the date kept getting pushed back to the point that the time finally came for the last deadline change, and they didn't have a start date on production. Disney and Marvel got that back for free. Now, I've been saying a lot of stuff here about deals. What does this have to do with DC Comics? Because of the nature of the reason why the Fantastic Four didn't have a running comic at the time when Fox owned the rights to the Fantastic Four as well as the X-Men. It was the same reason the X-Men didn't have very many comics. Like, they didn't completely cut the X-Men off, but they pared the X-Men down to where they only had 1 or 2 titles at any one given time. They might have had some other spin-offs too, but they really just weren't going all in on X-Men comics back then. But Fantastic Four had no comics at all. But in an era where there were no Fantastic Four comics on the market whatsoever, DC Comics came along and introduced the new age of heroes. This was an ill-fated new line of comics that included a lot of characters. We had characters that were all pastiches of what are easily more popular Marvel characters. You had characters like the Silencer, who was more or less just Black Widow, but actually black. Sideways, who was basically just Spider-Man, but with teleportation powers, and he was Latino. Damage, who was just the Hulk, like unapologetically the Hulk. You also had Curse of Brimstone, which was, for all intents and purposes, Ghost Rider. The Immortal Men, which were basically the Eternals. The New Challengers, which was probably maybe one of 2 of the only ones that was not like a pastiche of something else. New Challengers was just the New Challengers brought back. And then they had another title called The Unexpected, which I never read, but from what little bit I gleaned from it, it seemed like a fairly original property. As much as a pastiche collection of characters and stories could potentially be. But one of the ones, and I think the only one that was actually really truly successful, and the only one that actually stuck around past its sell date, maybe other than the Silencer, because that is one funny thing about the way the DC Comics did this. The Silencer actually appeared in a season of CW's Arrow. Go figure. But yes, spun out of Dark Knight's Metal, probably one of the best crossover events that DC had in recent memory at the time of 2016. All of this stuff happened, but as I said before, one franchise stood above them all, and that was the Terrifics. Now, I say that because I actually have it here on my notes. Let's see here. The Terrifics ran for 30 issues plus 1 annual. That is head and shoulders better than every other new age of DC title that came out. Damage ran for 16 issues plus I think 1 or 2 annuals. You also got Silencer, which ran for 18 issues plus an annual. You had Sideways that ran for 13, also with an annual. Curse of Brimstone ran for 12 plus an annual. And then you had Immortal Men, which only ran for 6. New Challengers only ran for 6, and The Unexpected only ran for 8. So the fact that the Terrifics ran for 30 issues is a testament to how good the book was. And to be fair, it should not have been a surprise. I'm not saying that some of these other books weren't good or great. I didn't care for Damage very much, if at all. I did think that Sideways was a good book. I thought Silencer wasn't my favorite book, but I didn't think it was bad. Curse of Brimstone was actually surprisingly fun to read. I didn't really get jiggy with the Immortal Men, but granted, at the time, I didn't really get jiggy with the Eternals until a little bit later as well. I don't think that one was ever gonna pop off for me. Like I said, for the rest of them, just kind of was what it was. But when I look at the Terrifics, when I initially read them, and I know what you guys are probably thinking, wait a minute, this just looks like the Fantastic Four. They're not even trying to hide this. And it's true, they weren't. I don't have any evidence to back this up, but I'm pretty sure that when Jeff Lemire pitched this story to DC editorial, I'm almost positive they all collectively said, yeah, let's keep the lawyers on standby. Now, the reason why this works is largely because of Jeff Lemire. Don't get me wrong, Jeff Lemire was not the only writer on this series. The writer who picked up after Jeff Lemire, Gene Luen Yang, Eisner Award winner for Superman Smashes the Klan, as well as for Lunar New Year Love Story, and also an upcoming writer for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by the time that this is being recorded. But yeah, both writers did a fantastic job, I thought. They turned in what I believe was probably one of the best series that DC at the time had, and it was an unabashed Fantastic Four knockoff. Like, it was not even possible to try and cover this up. And I have receipts for why this was the case. First off, let's run down the list. Who were the cast of characters, mind you? This team is called the Terrifics. Obviously, you're gonna have Mr. Terrific, right? Okay, so you have Mr. Terrific. That is basically your Reed Richards minus the superpowers. Mr. Terrific is basically, for all intents and purposes, a better version of Reed Richards if you don't count in the stretchy stuff, which, I mean, I would fight somebody on that. Well, I think he kind of plays around with this. He is one of, if not the smartest person in all of DC Comics.
After all, you're only the third on the smartest person list.
Well, I prefer not to draw too much attention to myself. Who do you think wrote that list?
He's probably even smarter than he lets on, because a lot of the times when we see Mr. Terrific doing his thing, oftentimes he does kind of keep his mouth shut. But there's a reason why characters like even Batman defer to Mr. Terrific when he's not sure about something, because he knows that Mr. Terrific is on top of his game. Now, you're asking yourself, okay, well, they don't have a Mr. Fantastic. How is this a carbon copy of the Fantastic Four? They don't have a smart guy who stretches. You're right, they don't. But they do have a pastiche for the Human Torch, who does. Now, Plastic Man, who, once again, does not have fire-based abilities. He has stretching, and I would even say better stretching powers than Reed Richards. Like, if you put Mr. Fantastic and Plastic Man in a cage match with each other, I mean, yeah, Reed would probably be able to outsmart Plastic Man, but Plastic Man would beat that ass, and I'm sorry, it just is what it is. Plastic Man's powers are tournament banned. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That dude is broken. That aside, Plastic Man, who is the guy who brings the levity and the wit and the banter of the team, he basically has the personality of Johnny Storm. And that's not like oh, they made him that way. He's always been a goofball. But it just so happens he's a goofball who can stretch. You also have to have somebody to play off of a Johnny Storm type of personality. So who else are you gonna get but Metamorpho? Now, I know what you're thinking. That's two shapeshifters on the team. Well, technically, Plastic Man can stretch. He always tends to maintain his own appearance whenever he transforms, but he basically can do kind of the same thing as Metamorpho, only he doesn't really deal in elements the way that Metamorpho does. But they can both shapeshift in very similar capacities. But Metamorpho is the Ben Grimm, the thing of this situation. And not only is he the Ben Grimm of the situation, he also has Ben Grimm's story arc. Like, over the course of this series, he spends a fair chunk of time wanting to be normal. The same way that Ben Grimm has off and on throughout his Fantastic Four publication history dating all the way back to the 60s. He goes through a fit of that over the course of these 30 issues, not the entire run, but I would say a good 5, 6, maybe 7 issues of it. He struggles with not looking normal. Even though he has a romantic partner who is perfectly fine with how he is. Honestly, I feel like Sapphire is more worried about his always running off to do superhero shenanigans than she is about his actual looks. But yeah, Metamorpho, he ticks all the boxes for the thing. Even down to his character dynamic with Plastic Man. They constantly get on each other's nerves, they're constantly ribbing each other, up until the point where they finally learn to like each other and actually become friends, even though they won't openly admit it. Even the way that Metamorpho is drawn sometimes, like, to be fair, he has often been drawn with a face that if you kind of messed with it a little bit, you redid a pencil line here or a pencil line there, he doesn't look that different from the Thing. They actually went out of their way to make him look a lot more like the Thing in the series, maybe a little more than what they even needed to. And then last but most certainly not least, you have to have an analog for the most powerful woman in Marvel Comics, the Invisible Woman. Well, it just so happens that they do. Enter Phantom Girl. Now, not to be confused with the Phantom Girl from the New Earth continuity 0 hour era of Phantom Girl. That version of the character, while they're similar, they're not the same. Albeit they do have the same powers, whereas Phantom Girl in Prime Earth continuity on the Terrifics, she does not have the ability to expressly turn invisible, though that is a byproduct of her power. Her thing is more being able to phase through solid matter, and that's her whole deal. And why she is a younger character than everybody else, that's why she's called Phantom Girl as opposed to Invisible Woman. But it also at the same time, while technically yes, Phantom Girl is just a newer version of an older original character, it's also at the same time a throwback to the yesteryear era where Invisible Woman went by Invisible Girl. Also, alongside it just being a newer, updated version of a previous DC Comics character. There's a lot of moving parts in this. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, cool. So if this is just a pastiche, why should I care about it? I can read Fantastic Four over here at Marvel. Well, see, that's where you're wrong. Well, yes, the Terrifics are an unabashed carbon copy of the Fantastic Four in terms of the types of character archetypes that are present. It's not in how those characters interact with one another and how their chemistry plays off of one another, maybe minus Plastic Man and Metamorpho. That's shot for shot, word for word, bar for fucking bar. When it comes down to it, the pastiches of Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Girl, they're not romantically linked. Well, also if they were, it would be weird because Phantom Girl is significantly younger. She's significantly younger than Mr. Terrific, so there would be a charge. I forget Phantom Girl's exact age, but yeah, she's a teenager. Like, she's high school age. There's no way. There is no way that would be okay. Now, you take that out of the equation, you look at the dynamic of the team. While I did say earlier that Plastic Man and Metamorpho share a similar, if not the exact same, chemistry as Human Torch and The Thing, the overall pairing of the team, they are not really overly fond of working with each other at first. When we first start off this comic, Mr. Terrific has no interest in being part of a team. As a matter of fact, the first chance he gets, he tries to ditch them. They all actually try to ditch each other in the early goings of the series, only to ultimately turn around and realize that they actually work better together. But the reason why they figure that out is because they can't get away from each other. Not because of their own personal reasons, but because there is a thing that's keeping them hooked together. A trip to the antimatter universe completely jumbles up their DNA and their genetic structure to the point where if they're terribly far away from each other, they'll just start to be unmade. So they are forced to have to stay in close proximity, hence become a superhero team. Even though they don't want to, they still always wind up finding themselves drug into problem of the week shenanigans every issue, and even some things that last more than one issue. It's because of all the different random and sundry characters that they are, surrounded by, not just themselves, but the other characters in their orbit. Case in point, they encounter a character who's just like Galactus, almost down to a T. For the most part, he is just called the Elder, but he is a Titanic-sized celestial being who, unlike Galactus, doesn't necessarily have an insatiable desire to eat planets, but he is technically an undead god. He is a zombie. He is, for all intents and purposes, a zombie, and he hungers. So there you have it. And he is massive. He is as large as Galactus is. While his look is a bit different, but if you take one peek at him, it's very obvious who he's supposed to be. There's another character who comes along named Pixelex, and they are the herald that ends up coming up in this, and they're, for all intents and purposes, they're Silver Surfer. And this is kind of funny because, once again, this comic was coming out around the late 20-teens. It is interesting to me that their version of Silver Surfer was female, before the MCU had a mind to have a female Silver Surfer in Fantastic Four First Steps. I actually thought that was hilarious. You can't make this shit up at this point. They also have a version of Shuma Gorath, though if I remember correctly, the character's name never comes up. They even had pastiches of two super teams. In this case, the ones in the Terrifics are played mostly for evil, whereas in the case of the Fantastic Four, one was evil, one was not. And that is, you had the Frightful Four and you had the Fantastics. These were characters that, in a lot of ways, were analogs for the Fantastic Four, but just sometimes were on the opposite side of them on things, or in the case of the Fantastics, they usually were more often on the right side of the Fantastic Four as opposed to not. But in the Terrifics, they have a couple of different villain groups, one called the Terribles and one called the Dreadfuls. And while both of these have their place in the Terrifics, one of them I think is actually a little bit better and more interesting than the other in some regards. But you'll probably notice that one of the Dreadfuls looks awfully familiar. And that's because it's Dr. Dread, or as what he is supposed to be, Dr. Doom. And he is a off and on villain for a large part of the series, and is instrumental in the formation of the Terrifics. I don't really want to say much about Dr. Dread outside of the fact that he just looks like Dr. Doom. His motivations, even while they're not exactly the same as Dr. Doom, his motivations you could consider similar in some respects. But yeah, it's unabashed. He is, they're not even trying to file the serial numbers off this shit. Dr. Dread. Look, if you couldn't figure it out by now that Jeff Lemire was not being serious at all when he was coming up with this shit, he was like, nah, look, we're doing it. He said, we're gonna push this shit as far as we can. And they did. And they turned in what was an amazing series, even introducing some characters that I'm sad to say we don't see more of. One of those being Offspring, who is the Franklin Richards of the team. Even though technically he's only the child of Plastic Man, which, I mean, to be fair, it kind of tracks, since Franklin Richards is the son of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic. But like, his power, Offspring's power, it's not like your reality warping the way that Franklin Richards is, but he has the same broken ass power set as Plastic Man. And while technically there is no younger character who stands in for Valeria Richards, there is a character who shows up who you could make a case for being the closest thing to that, and that's Ms. Terrific. I actually did a video breaking down Ms. Terrific a year, 2 years ago, I believe, but it still stands up. I totally recommend. Go check it out up here. I'll try and remember. Maybe Robo will leave a note or something for me to be reminded of this. That said, Ms. Terrific is not a female version of Mr. Terrific. She's not that. She comes from Earth 23, the same world where President Superman comes from, where the majority of superheroes are black and brown people and other people of color. And in this particular world, Mr. Terrific doesn't exist because, just like how in main continuity, Michael Holt's wife died and this galvanized him into becoming Mr. Terrific, well, the same thing happened for Paula on Earth 23. Michael died, so she was galvanized into becoming Ms. Terrific. But yeah, she's the other inventor on the team, and because of the fact that she is, also one of the smartest people on her planet, she also gets into a lot of the inventing, tinkering, and things that Mr. Terrific gets into. And it also creates an interesting dynamic between the two characters because it's almost as if they get the opportunity to start over again. They both get their respective partner back. And while that is the case, there are pitfalls there. And I think those pitfalls are made very interesting. And while there is no Herbie to speak of, there is Element Dog, who is basically a dog with the same powers as Metamorpho, and kind of fills in that little gap nice and neatly. Like I said, the Terrifics, it was so good that even James Gunn said that this was the story that inspired him to put Mr. Terrific in Superman, to have him as a part of the DCU. And while he never said it expressly, it is implied Mr. Terrific, especially because of how popular he is now, he very well likely could see a resurgence and maybe even more face time in the DCU because of how well he was received in that movie and how people flocked to go pick up their copies of the Terrifics, because when James Gunn made that announcement that the Terrifics inspired his take, on Mr. Terrific, those books were selling out everywhere. No differently than it did for Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, or All-Star Superman, or any of the other books that James Gunn said inspired his version of the DCU. And I do recommend, if you have never read Terrifics before, I think you should. I think you owe it to yourself to do so. And if you do, come back and talk to me about it. Come back here in the comments. If you are someone who has already read the Terrifics, tell me what you think about it. It's a fantastic story. Or you know what? No, scratch that. It's a terrific story.